Hi, everyone. I wanted to get on here and record this a little early because we are having our fellowship gathering. And so we won't be doing the study on Shabbat. And I just wanted to go ahead and cover this week's parashah. So we are in Numbers chapter 1. So we're starting a brand new book of Torah, and it goes from Numbers 1:1 to chapter 4, verse 20. And this parasha is called Bamidbar because the book of Numbers is actually Bamidbar in Hebrew, which is in the desert or in the wilderness. It's the way it's often translated. But it doesn't really necessarily mean a desert. It's more like an uncharted territory or a place that's uninhabited. If you think about, the West, when you years ago, that big open area, that would be like a Bamidbar. And so there's a connection between the wilderness or the desert, Bamidbar, and the word to speak. The root of that is midbar, and midbar means to speak. Like if you're saying in Hebrew that I speak, you would say ani medaber or ani medaberet, that I speak Hebrew, ani medaberet ivrit. So in the wilderness is where he speaks, and this is where he actually gives the Torah, and it happens at Shavuot or Pentecost. So this parsha is actually the one that is read prior to Shavuot or Pentecost. And Shavuot, I'll typically use the Hebrew word there. Shavuot is where we matan Torah, we're receiving the Torah, not it's not the giving, but it's the receiving of it, because Yah is giving it. We're the ones who are receiving it. And it happens in the Hebrew month of Sivan. So this month is about a time of receiving from Yah. But we have to really be prepared to receive. So if you think about it, a lot of times it's a lot easier to give a gift than it is to receive a gift. And in order to receive, you really must be humble. So that is part of this upcoming Shavuot, is to walk in humility. Um, and Yah, when you think about it, Israel was not chosen by Yah because they were the greatest or they were the largest in number. In Deuteronomy 7:7, Yah says that Yah didn't set his heart on you or choose you because you numbered more than any other people. On the contrary, you were the fewest or the least or the littlest of all the peoples. And so Yah chose Israel because they were the fewest or the least. And that word, fewest or least, depending on your translation, is the Hebrew word me'at, which means little. So could it be that Yah is saying that he chose Israel because they were the ones that were making themselves the littlest of all the nations, that they were making themselves the most humble of all the nations? And so, like I said, there is a difference between giving and receiving. Yah gives his Torah, he gives his Ruach, but are we ready to receive? You think about many times how many people are out there, and Yah has presented his word, but yet many still don't come to know him. So at Shavuot, I believe, this is not something just as a memorial of an event that happened in the past, but that it is also this receiving of the Torah is something that we should be doing on a daily basis. We should be, listening for his word and getting in his word and receiving of his word daily. And we should be striving to write that word upon our hearts. In Jeremiah chapter 31, in verse 32, it says, "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yah. I will put my Torah within them and write it on their hearts. I will be their Elohim, and they will be my people." And in Proverbs 3:3, it says, "Do not let grace and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck and write them on the tablets of your heart." So, like I said, this word Bamidbar, has medaber at its root, but at the root of, Midbar is actually debar, which is speaking or words. So we not only have to speak, but we also have debar or devar, which is word. And so we think about Yah speaks. So it is this place where he's speaking to us. Sometimes we feel like that wilderness of that uncharted territory that we're all alone. But that's a place that he brings us so that we can't hear those outside voices and we're only listening to him. And, we have no one else to turn to. That's when Yah really speaks to us. And so we have to be able to have our ears open so that we can hear his word. So just as, Yeshua spoke to his Talmudim to wait in Jerusalem, right before his death, in Acts, and he told them they had to wait. And so here, after all of this stuff that happened, think about they are waiting. After Passover, they're staying and waiting in Jerusalem. Why? Well, all this time they're tarrying. They don't know why they're waiting. They're just saying, it tells them to wait. And so waiting is hard. And again, that humbles us. Waiting is hard. We just had an experience with that earlier today, waiting in line behind someone. And it was very difficult, especially when the people were being disrespectful, but it humbles us. And so that's something that, we should think about as these Talmudim are sitting there waiting and, the outpouring of the Ruach in Acts 2. But it was a time that, they're sitting there thinking, what are we waiting for? And Yah is going to speak. Now, one of the things that we see in that word midbar again, not only do we have midbar and medaber, but we also have davar, which is the word, but we also have another word within there, which is the mem dalet, which is mod. In English, we would think about MAD being mad, but it's mod. And mod is actually a clothing or a cloth, a measure, a garment. Okay. And so think about garments in Hebraic thought display your status. And for example, there are certain garments that kings wear. There's certain garments that the priest would wear or the high priest would wear. And when we change our garments, it's displaying a change in status. And so think about the children of Israel. They came out of Egypt. They left Egypt physically, but they still had that mindset of being that slave. And Yah is bringing them here to the mountain. He's taking them into the wilderness and he's speaking to them, speaking to their heart. And he's within that word midbar, we have that word mod. We've actually got where he's actually taking off the garments of the children of Israel, the garments of slaves. And he's putting on the garment of what it is to be a set apart people. And it's not physically happening, but it's a spiritual thing that was happening here as they are receiving the Torah. Now, the rest of the word midbar, so we had mod at the beginning of that, but we have the word bar. So the mod, the mem dalet, and then you have the beit resh. Beit resh bar in Aramaic is the word for sun. So think about too what this word midbar is broken apart into mod and bar is actually the garments of the sun. And in Galatians chapter 3, verse 26, verse 27, says, "For in union with the Messiah, you are called children of Elohim through trusting faithfulness, because as many of you were immersed in the Messiah have clothed yourself with Messiah." Okay, so it's thinking about too, that's symbolically what was happening here at Shavuot, is they were clothing themselves in the Mashiach. They were, taking off those garments of the slaves of Egypt, and they're putting on what it is to be his set apart people. They're putting on the garments of the Son. So, in order to receive his word, they had to be brought to a place, a midbar, and then they had to put on his word and put on that garments of the Son. And where did this happen? So if we go to Numbers chapter 1 and verse 1, this is where the parashah begins. It says, Yah spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert, in the tent of meeting, on the first day of the second month of the second year after they had left the land of Egypt. And so here we see there's lots of numbers. This book is called Numbers in English. Okay. And so there are numbers here are actually going to help us determine the timing of things. So we see that this is the first day of the second month, and it's the second year from the Exodus. So that means, because remember, they left Egypt the first month, okay? And it's now the second month of the second year. So that means it's been about 13 months from the time that they left Egypt. And so, when we go back to Exodus chapter 19, this is where we can see Exodus chapter 19, verse 1. In the third month after the people of Israel had left the land of Egypt, the same day they came to the Sinai desert. After setting out from Rephidim and arriving at the Sinai desert, they set camp in the desert. There in front of the mountain, Israel set up camp. So think about what we just read. This is giving us, again, more of a timing. The children of Israel arrived in Sinai at the third month after leaving Egypt or Mitzrayim. Okay, so in verse 1, the third month after they left the land of Egypt, they set up camp at Sinai. So that was the first year. That's when, we see here that they're receiving the Torah here in that first year. But yet in this parashah, Yah speaks to Moshe in the second month of the second year. So the children of Israel had been encamped at Sinai after receiving the Torah now for almost a year. So think about, for about a year after receiving the Torah, they've been camped there. They're waiting. They're working for Yah, because remember, if the cloud didn't move, they didn't move. And, I said they're working for Yah. Yeah, working. Why did I say working? Because they've been given the instructions for building the articles of the Mishkan, or the tabernacle. In Exodus chapter 40 and verse 2, it says, on the first day of the first month, you are to set up the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. And the Mishkan was actually completed and set up on the first day of the first month. And that would have been the first day of the first month of the second year, because remember, they left Egypt the first day, 15th of the month. So this would have made the tabernacle, when we start reading in Numbers 1, this would have made the timing of the tabernacle, it had already been completed for about a month when this happened. Okay, so that's getting the timing down of where we are. They've been at this mountain for, they've received the Torah a year ago. They've been camped there for over about a year, and in about a month, they've actually completed the work of the articles of the tabernacle and set it up. So Numbers chapter 1, verse 2. Take a census of the entire assembly of the people of Israel by the clans and families, and record the names of all the men 20 years old and over who are subject to military service in Israel. You and Aharon are to enumerate them company by company. Take with you from each tribe someone who is head of a clan. These are the men you are to take with you. From Reuben, Elizur, the son of Shedior. From Shimon, Shlumiel, the son of Zurishaddai. From Yehuda, Nachshon, the son of Aminadab. From Yissachar, Netanel, the son of Zuar. From Zebulun, Eliab, the son of Helon. And of the children of Joseph, from Ephraim, Elishama, the son of Amidud, From Manasseh, Gamliel, the son of Pedazur. From Benjamin, Abidan, the son of Gidoni. From Dan, Ahiezer, the the son of Ammishaddai, and from Asher, Pagiel, the son of Okran, from Gad, Eliasaph, Asaph, the son of Duiel, and from Naphtali, Ahira, the son of Enan. And these are the ones called from the assembly, the chiefs of their fathers' clans, the heads of thousands in Israel. So Moshe and Aaron took these men who had been designated by name, and on the first day of the second month, they gathered the whole assembly to state their genealogies by families and clans and recorded the names of all those 20 years old and over, as well as their total numbers. So we notice here that these men were chosen and they were called by name. And, these leaders were chosen for their character, just as we are chosen and called by name. We see in Isaiah chapter 43 and verse 1 says, "But now this is what Yah says. He who created you, Yaakov, he formed you, Israel." Remember, we're grafted into Israel. "Don't be afraid, for I have redeemed you. I am calling you by your name, and you are mine." And we see in John chapter 15, verse 16 says, "You did not choose me. I chose you. And I've commissioned you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask from the Father in my name, he may give you." So we are chosen and called by name too. Now, this parsha moves on to cover the census. I want to skip down to Numbers chapter 1, verse 44. And it says, "Moshe, Aaron, and the 12 leaders of Israel, each from a clan, counted the people of Israel by their clans, those 20 years old and over, eligible for military service in Israel. And the grand total came to 603,550. Now, this is the same census that was taken when we read Exodus chapter 38. And if we go back to Exodus chapter 38, in verse 26, remember what it says here. This was a beka per person, that is half a shekel or 1/5 of an ounce, using the sanctuary shekel for everyone 20 years old or older, counted in the census, 603,550 men. So this is when they took the census, they weren't counting the people as much. They were actually bringing this half shekel. So this census, of course, did not include Levi, as their main duty was in the service of the tabernacle. And we can see that in chapter 2, Numbers chapter 2, if we go down to verse 33, it says, "But as Yah ordered Moshe, the Levi'im are not to be counted with the rest of Israel." Now we see still in this parsha, if we go over to chapter 3, that there is a census of Levi that is taken. If we go down to verse 15 in chapter 3, "Take a census of the tribe of Levi by the clans and families. Count every male a month or old or over." And if we skip down to verse 39, go through all of the counting. But the total number of the Levi'im whom Moshe and Aaron counted by their clans, all the males a month old or over, was 22,000. So each one of the families of the Levites were given duties. And we can, if you look through chapter 3, you can see, what the Kohathites, what the Maarites were to do. They all had different duties when it came to dismantling and carrying the tabernacle. Okay, so I don't want to focus as much on that, but I do want to go look at something else. And this is where I'm going to spend probably the majority of it. So let's go back to chapter 1 a minute. And we're going to look at the end of chapter 1 in verse 52. It says that the rest of Israel are to set up camp, company by company, each man with his own banner. So each one of the tribes of Israel was to camp by their own banner or standard. Okay. And Yah is a God of patterns. Um, and, when we think about how they're placed around the tabernacle, does their placement hold a greater meaning? And we think when we look at this, that the placement of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, is in the center of the camp. And, the 12 tribes have to be divided into 4 divisions. And in this manner, you think about the Mishkan is surrounded equally on all 4 sides, on all 4 directions, the east, the west, the south, the north, by groups of 3 tribes. And each one of these 3 tribes that is on each side had a leader. And so therefore, one of those had to be chosen to be the leader on that side. So let's go to chapter 2, Numbers 2 and verse 1. Yah says to Moshe and Aaron, the people of Israel are to set up camp by clans, each man with his own banner, and under his clan symbol. They are to camp around the tent of meeting, but at a distance. Now let's start looking at these camps. So and he starts with the east side. So we think about the sun rises in the east, okay? So Numbers 2 and 3. The camping on the east side toward the sunrise are to be under the banner of the camp of Yehuda. They are to camp according to companies. By tribe and leader, they are as follows. By the tribe chief number, Yehuda Nachshon, the son of Aminadab, 74,600. Issachar, Netaniel, the son of Zuar, 54,400. Zebulun, Eliab, the son of Helon, 57,400, for a total of 186,400. This group is to set out first. So we think about, you've got the Mishkan in the center, and of course you've got the Levites that are camped around. But on the east side also, after you have the Levites here, you have 3 of the tribes. And on this east side, you have Yehuda, Issachar, and Zebulun. And Yehuda is chosen to be the leader on that side. And, if you look, he's accompanied by Issachar and Zebulun, 2 of his younger brothers. They're both by the mother Leah. And so the sun, it even says the sun rises in the east. So this east side, if you think about it, is a picture of the source of light. Where is our source of light? Our source of light resides in who is head of that tribe. That side is Yehuda. And who is of the tribe of Yehuda? Yeshua. So that's where our source lies. It's tied in with the sun, that's our source. And Yehuda is the leader on that side. And it is from Yehuda that Yeshua comes. Now, Yehuda, Issachar, and Zebulun, like I said, they're on the east side, but what separates them from the Mishkan is actually Moshe and Aaron. That's where their camp is too. And so Moshe, Aaron, and the Levites, you think about, they're all around the encampment here, but they're the ones who occupy themselves with the Torah. And so as a result, Moshe and Aaron and these Levites that are camped around, they're right there within, distance of Yehuda, Issachar, and Zebulun. And so no doubt they're going to see and hear Moshe and Aaron all the time, and that they're going to be definitely influenced by their way of life. Now, Numbers chapter 2, we're going to go down to verse 10 now. That those camping on the south are to be under the banner of the camp of Reuben. They are to camp according to the companies by tribe and leader. They are as follows. Tribe chief number Reuben, Elizur, the son of Shedeur, 46,500. Shimon, Shlumiel, the son of Zurishaddai, 59,300. Gad, Eliasaph, the son of Ruiel, 45,650. and for a total on that side of 151,450. And it says that this group is to set out second. So when they're breaking camp, he's even telling you the order that you're going to go in. So on the south side, we have the east side. Now we're going down to the south side. On the south side, the leader of those three tribes, you've got Reuben, Shimon, and Gad, is going to be Reuben. And you think about it, well, in Israel, we think about the south. What is the south known for there? Well, the south side is where the source of dew and rain come from. And if we think about rain and dew, especially in the Middle East, as a sign of mercy. And if you look at these three tribes, their lives is a picture of Yah's mercy upon them. Numbers 2, verse 18. Those camping on the west are to be under the banner of the camp of Ephraim, and they are to accamp according to their companies by tribe and leader. They are as follows. Tribe chief number Ephraim Elishama, the son of Amihud, 40,500. Manasseh Gamliel, the son of Pedazur, 32,200. Benjamin Abidan, the son of Gidoni, 35,400, for a total of 108,100. And this group is to set out third. So we have the east side, the south side. Now we're going to the west side. And on the west side, we've got Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And of those three, the leader on that side is going to be Ephraim. So think about how Yah is just organizing everything. You have all of these people, and Yah's organizing. This is how you're going to move out. This is how you're going to break camp. This is the order you're going to go in. He's very organized. And when we think about these are on the west, well, what do we know about the west? Well, in the land of Israel, on the west, you've got the Mediterranean Sea. Well, this is where the west is where the harsh weather comes in to the land of Israel. And so if you think about on the west side lies their strength to withstand the harsh elements for, think about, because Ephraim, what does Ephraim mean? Ephraim means doubly fruitful, or, they're going to be like doubly blessed with fruit. And so their numbers are going to be large, and that's going to help them withstand those harsh elements. There is much strength in numbers. If we go down to verse 25, those camping on the north are to be under the banner of the camp of Dan, and they are to camp according to their companies by tribe and leader. They are as follows. The tribe chief number, Dan, Ahiezer, the son of Ammishaddai, 62,700. Asher Pagliel, the son of Okran, 41,500. Naphtali Ahira, the son of Enan, 53,400. A total of 157,600. And this group is to set out last with their banners. So we did the east, the south, the west, and now we're going to the north. And so on the north side, we've got Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. And the tribal leader on the north side is going to be Dan. And when we look at, not specifically Israel, but if you look at Jerusalem, that the side that is mostly attacked was from the north. And the north, this was the side that was actually considered darkness. And, if we look at the land, that's where Naphtali was. And however, in the midst of darkness, Yah's going to have light. Israel has light here. So if we look at these three tribes there, we got Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. So Naphtali is the area that had this land of darkness, but it was also the light. Asher on that side is the source of light, because Asher's symbol is the olive tree from which we get shemen, oil, the light. And so even in that midst of darkness, Israel has light. And so when we look at all of these tribes, the whole house of Israel, in order to see the complete picture, they were all around the tabernacle. They were one nation. They were camped. And they were never meant to be like the other tribes. They are their own each individual tribe with their own each individual strengths and weaknesses, but it's not one tribe. They're one nation, but not one tribe. And when we look at the encampment around them, I found it interesting that if you compare this in Numbers 2 if you go over to the next parsha in number 7, and we see that when the tabernacle was dedicated, that it talks about them bringing the offerings, that the order that they bring the offerings when they dedicated the tabernacle is the same order that the tribes went out. It starts on that east side. It is the same order that they go out. And that's the order. He had that order set in place, that there wouldn't be mass chaos between or arguing over, I want to go first or I want to go first. No, y'all laid it down. This is the order it was going to be. And that's the same order that they brought at the dedication of the tabernacle. Now, from this point on, I really wanted to look a little bit more at this, and it might seem like it's out of the box a little bit. And we may challenge you to think about a little bit of things here that you haven't thought about before, because I wanted to make a connection between what we just read in this week's parashah and how the camps of the children of Israel were and their symbols, and how that aligns with Ezekiel's vision. So let's go over to the book of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 1, and I know there has been lots of stuff on Ezekiel's vision and what this looks like and what it means. And, some look, it's like, oh, this is talking about UFOs. And I'm not going to get into all that, but I do want to go through some of this. So Ezekiel 1:1. In the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, while I was among the exiles by the Kawar River, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. Okay, so here we see Ezekiel, and he is sitting there with the exiles. So he's sitting there with others that have come into captivity. And he's the one who saw this vision. Doesn't say the others did, but it just said that he saw this vision. Okay, and we'll skip down to verse 4. And I looked and I saw a windy storm approaching from the north, and a huge cloud with flashing fire glowing brilliantly all around, with the color of gleaming amber from within the fire. And inside there appeared to be 4 living creatures that looked like human beings, but each one had 4 faces and 4 wings. Now, okay, so we see that there are these 4 creatures that are here. Okay, now skip down to verse 15. As I gazed at the living creatures, I saw they had wheels on the ground, one next to each of the 4 of the living face creatures. And all 4 of the wheels looked the same. Their inner parts gleamed like beryl, and their structure seemed to be that of a wheel inside of a wheel. So these creatures basically were like a wheel within a wheel. And we've heard that said before. And, as the Ruach led, they moved. Okay. Now, like I said, I'm not going to look at every verse here, but I do want to pull this apart a little bit. If we go down to verse 22. Over the heads of the living creatures was what appeared to be a dome glittering like ice. It was awesome, spread out over their heads above them. And so these creatures, they're living beings. They're like men. They're living beings here. And they're under this dome. Well, the Hebrew word for the dome here is rakia, and that's the same word that is used in Genesis 1:6, which says, Elohim said, let there be a dome in the middle of the water and let it divide water from water. Okay, so that's the same word rakia that is used there. Okay. Now, if I go back to Ezekiel, and I want to go back and look at these living creatures, and we go to chapter 1, I'm going to go down to verse 10. But for the appearance of their faces, they had human faces in the front. Each of the 4 had a lion's face on the right, Each of the four had a bull's face on the left, and each of the four had an eagle's face toward the rear. Okay, so let's digress for a minute, okay? Because remember that Hebraic viewpoint is not linear, okay? Time is cyclical, it goes in a cycle, and Yah does things in a cycle. And we know that Yah is a God of restoration, and he is returning things, back to the way they were at the beginning, back in the garden. So this is a cycle, a circle. And in Hebrew, gagal, or fine is the Hebrew word. So we need to keep that in mind when we're thinking about Ezekiel's vision. Now, we see in verse 5 that these were living creatures, and they had these four faces, and we just read that, okay, they're going to have a human face, they're going to have a lion face, they're going to have a bull face, and they're also going to have an eagle's face. Now, wait a second. Where do we see living creatures that have those same images with it? Okay, it's in this week's Parsha. If we go back to Numbers 2:2, the people of Israel are to set up camp by clans, each man with his own banner and his own clan symbol. They are to camp around the tent of meeting, but at a distance. So when we look at those pictures, these living creatures are actually a picture of Israel. What are the four sides of the tabernacle camp emblems? Okay, so if we go to Numbers 2 and 3, remember we got Yehuda on that side. What's the symbol of Yehuda? The lion. Okay, and since we're looking at patterns, remember the pattern of the dome with Ezekiel's vision. He said that God said, let there, in Genesis 1:14, that let there be lights in the dome of the sky to divide the day and the night. Let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years. Okay, well, think about what were these things, that these lights in the sky that were going to be for signs, seasons, days, and years. They were the constellations, not only the sun and the moon, but you also have the sign, these constellations, these stars that are going to be in the heavens that are going to be for signs. So we think about these stars. Well, these stars actually also form different pictures, okay, these constellations, and these 12 tribes of Israel camp according to Yah's pattern, and the 12 tribes of Israel actually correspond to these constellations. Now, of course, I've mentioned some in the tribe teachings that Hasatan has perverted those into the zodiac, and you're guiding your life by those. And no, Yah guides our life. His word is our guide. It is not the stars. And so we think about going back to this picture. Yehuda is the lion. Well, what constellation is connected with the lion? It's Leo. Well, if you look up at the sky, Leo is found where in the sky? On the eastern side of the sky, which is the same position that Yehuda is on the tabernacles. He's encamped on the eastern side. Now, we also saw that those living creatures had a face of a man. And if we go back to Numbers chapter 2, go down to verse 2, we see that under the camp of the banner of Reuben, his name is See a Son. He's what? A man. He's going to grow up into be a man. And so this, when we think about Reuben here, Reuben is the man. The constellation that is connected, I believe, with Reuben is Aquarius. And Aquarius is found where? In the southern position. Okay. They also, these creatures also had a face of a bull or an ox. Okay. So in Numbers 2 and verse 18, the camp on the west under the banner of the camp of Ephraim. Okay. So the ox, Ephraim is the ox. Well, the ox or the bull is a picture of the Taurus, the bull. Okay. in the constellations, that's the one that's linked with the bull. Then we also see that those living creatures had a face of an eagle. Okay, Numbers 2 and 25. Under they're to camp on the north side under the banner of the camp of Dan. Okay, so Dan is actually associated with the eagle, but he also has the symbol of the serpent. So Dan actually is one of those tribes that have two different symbols there. And in Genesis 49 and verse 16, Genesis 49 and verse 16, we see, oops, sorry, just a second. That it says, Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a viper on the road, a horned snake in the path that bites the horse's heels so its rider falls off backwards. So if we think about, okay, well, wait a minute, what constellation then would align with that? We don't necessarily think of we've got an eagle or a serpent. And the constellation that I think that really aligns with Dan here is the scorpion, because the scorpion is going to puncture or bite too. And that this is Scorpio. Okay, when you think about Scorpio, Scorpio is located where in the sky? The north. So when we look at those, just not only do we have on the physical realm the tribes encamped here, but you also have a picture of the tribes around in the heavenlies. And so when we think about this, and look at these directions, when we think about directions, we think about these directions on a compass and, think about a compass rose, okay? No compass rose, you're north, south, east, and west, okay? And if we take that compass rose and we actually align it with the tribes, we can see them encamping around the Mishkan. You've got all of these constellations that are up in the sky, but you also have the ones that are lining up with the tribes aligned around the encampment. Now, I believe too that when you go over to the Brit Hadashah, that the Gospels, the Besorah, what we think of as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that those also, I believe, align with the encampment around the tribes, of the encampment of the tribes around the Mishkan. So if we think about the lion, the east side, okay, and that would be, I believe, aligned with the book of Matthew, because what is Matthew really telling us about? He's telling us about Yeshua being the king, and the king is focusing on the kingdom. And he's think about him being from the lion of the tribe of Judah. The kings have to be from Judah, okay? And then we think about, okay, on the south side, we've got the man. And this, I believe, is Luke. Because what is Luke telling us about Yeshua? It really focuses on Yeshua being a man. It's the straight facts, just like we, see with Reuben, the south side's linked with Reuben being a son. So we've got Luke is really talking about how much, how he was a man. Then on the western side, we have the ox. Okay, and this is, from a right, well, we've got, I believe that links with the book of Mark, which is, what does the ox? The ox is, the animal that is used as a servant, is helping us to work. And so Yeshua, we see here in Mark, is a picture of the servant. It's that son of man concept. He is going to be a servant. And then we go to the northern side. And the northern side under the tribe of Dan is this eagle, or this, this scorpion, this piercing there. Well, the eagle has the talons that'll pierce. And here we see that in the north, I believe it links with John. Well, not only, because you have these two symbols here, but the eagle does what? The eagle is the one that flies off toward the heavens. And we see in John, he's really talking about Yeshua being the Son of God, that he came from the heavens. In Proverbs 23 and verse 5, it says, the eagle flies toward the heavens there. And so I think that the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, that these books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John also align with the symbols of the tribes around the tabernacle. Now, if we go back to this image that Ezekiel is giving us, he said that there was like these creatures were like a wheel within a wheel. And if we think about, okay, a wheel on a car, and you've got the wheel, but in the center you have that hub, which is actually a circle. Okay, so there's a wheel within a wheel. And that center part, I think that the outside of that wheel, if we're like that living creature, the outside of that wheel is the 7,000 year plan for man. Okay. But what is the inside, the wheel within a wheel, that center hub? What is the center? It comes back to Shabbat. And that the center is Shabbat. And just as, Yeshua is the center, because Yeshua says, he is the Shabbat. Okay. So here we have this wheel within a wheel. So you've got the center, and then you've got that outer wheel around it. And then you usually think about a bicycle. You have those spokes. We have these 7 spokes that are going out, which are the Moedim. And they all operate in a cycle. It's that wheel that's going around. And once the hub and the Shabbat and these spokes are set in place, these 7 Moedim, then you put on the outside rim, or the outside predestined set amount of time is set in place. Because if the hub goes slower, then the outer is going to go slower. And, like once you start looking at Ezekiel 1 and you see this vision of a wheel within a wheel is actually a picture of a man who is in the center of Yah's Moedims. He is there at Yah's appointed time on Shabbat. That is his center. And then he's also doing all of those Moedim. If we go to verse 9 in Ezekiel, chapter 1, verse 9, notice what it says here. They touched one another with their wings. They did not turn when they moved, but each one moved straight forward. Okay, wait a minute. They have wings? But the word for wings is actually the word kanaf, which is what we call the edge of a talit, a purshal, a kanaf. So this creature, this living being that is, in the hub of Shabbat and following these Moedim, it says that they're going to touch each other with their wings. Okay. And it says their wings touched or were joined to one another. Well, in Hebrew, that word joined or touching is actually the word haver. Okay. Like haverim, being friend, but it's haver. So sometimes if you might say havera, that would be like a friend. And a lot of times in Yiddish, you will hear it talked about that way. But when you are a haver, you are united with another person. Now, notice it didn't say that they didn't turn away from Yah's ways, but each one moved straight forward. And in Hebrew, it doesn't really say they moved straight forward. In Hebrew, it says, Ish el iber pani. Ish el iber pani. Ish. Okay. They didn't cross over el iber panim from the face of their ish, their husband. They didn't cross over from the face of their husband. So even though they're moving and they're in unity, they never turn their back on Yah. Now, another thing that is interesting is if we think about where this vision is taking place, it's by the Havar River. And in Hebrew, it says Nahar Kavar. Nahar is the river, Kavar is the name. And so when you look at the numerical value, the gematria of this place, the Nun Hay, the Nun is 50, Hay is 5. resh, nahar, 200. Okay, so nun he resh, 55, 200. And then you have kaf, bait, resh. Kaf is 20, bait is 2, and resh is 200. Okay, so we've got kaf, bait, resh. And when you put that all together, we have 477, which is interesting because there is a phrase that has that exact same value of 477, and it is found in the book of Luke. So let's go over to Luke chapter 11 and verse 29. Luke 11:29. As the people crowded around him, Yeshua went on to say, "This generation is a wicked generation. It asks for a sign, but no sign will be given it except the sign of Jonah." Well, when you look at that in the King James, look at this is what it says. It says, "And when the people were gathered thick together, he began to say, 'This is an evil generation. They seek a sign. There shall be no sign given it but the sign of Jonas the prophet.'" So the sign of Jonah, okay, the sign of Jonah is Ha'ot Yonah. Okay, Ha'ot Yonah. And Ha'ot is written Hey, Aleph, Tav. Hey is 5, Aleph is 1, Tav is 400. Yonah is written Yud, Vav, Nun, Hey. Yud is 10, Vav is 6, Nun is 50, and Hey is 5. So the sign of Yonah is 477. And look at what this connection is, that where this vision is happening for Ezekiel is at Nahar Kavar. It's in, they're in Babylon. Here he is by this river, and he sees he's amongst the exiles. He's one of the ones who were taken captive. And now he's sitting there and he sees this vision at the place that has the same numerical value. And Yeshua, when he comes along and he says that these evil, the people that are looking for signs, the only thing that's going to be given is the sign of Jonah, linking it to the same place where this vision was given. Because why did they go into exile? Because they disobeyed his words. That's why they went into exile. And so, when Yeshua is talking about the sign of Jonah, he's taking them back to remember, you went into exile because you weren't doing my commands. You weren't being like Ezekiel's vision, that creature that was at the center, that was a wheel within a wheel. Okay. And so could it be, think about, we tend to think about the picture, and I know in a lot of your Bibles will have the picture of the encampment, and it actually shows them like forming a cross. And could it be, though, that there were so many that were encamped there that it was more of a circular pattern surrounding the camp? And I did find this online, and I do want to share this picture. Let me see if I can get right here and share this picture. And so just notice this picture is like, here is the Mishkan. So you've got the east side here, the south side, the west side then, and the north side, depending, how it's positioned. And you can tell this is the east side because this is the side with the gate. And so, and you look, you've got the 3 tribes here. And then you actually have them forming like a circle spread out around them. I think it was, I truly believe it's going to be more like this picture of the encampment around them. It's going to be more of a circular shape than just straight out in a line. And there is definitely a reason that I do believe that, because, when we think about, well, I'll come back to that, but I wanted to look at that because, too, go back to that image of a compass rose. Okay. That circle, we got the north, south, east, and west. Well, it's like a clock. It's literally like a clock, like a timepiece. And if we put them in the order that they are camping around the tabernacle, the northern, we have Dan like at 12 o'clock. Yehuda is on the eastern side. He's going to be like at 3 o'clock. We're going to have Reuben at the south, and that's going to be like at 6 o'clock. And then we're going to have Ephraim at like 9 o'clock. Because think about it, there's 360 degrees there if it's if a circle and it's like a clock. And what's interesting is not only do you have that 360 degrees in a circle, but when you think about, like we made the connection with the constellations, that the zodiac, what's called the zodiacal precession, that how they're moving in the sky, is actually a total of 2,160 years. Okay, so if we think about that, if that's a circle and we're taking the 2,160 years and dividing it by the 360, because there's 360 degrees in a circle, then we are left with 6. 2,160 divided by 360 is 6, which is man's time on this earth is approximately a day. It's like 1,000 years, 6,000 years. And it again links with, I think it links with that picture that Yah's having that outer rim be the set amount of time here. Now, we do know that it says in Psalms 104 and verse 19 that the moon was also to mark the seasons. Now, wait a minute. The moon is to mark the seasons and the sun knows when to set. Well, interestingly, I found out that the moon's diameter, think about a sphere, it's a sphere, and the moon's diameter across here is actually almost 2,160 miles. To our best estimate, that is how far across the moon is, which is the number of the zodiacal precession, is the 2,160. So I just thought that was an interesting connection. Now, when we think about the moon has no light of its own. It doesn't give light. It only reflects the light from the sun. So if we think about similarly, we should be reflecting the light of the sun, Yeshua. Now, like I said, I wanted to look at and make this connection with Ezekiel, but I also want to look at it in a different way. Because if we really look too at, I believe that Yah not only uses patterns and he does that, but he is also speaking to the people who were there at that time. And so when we look at Ezekiel's vision through those ancient Near East eyes, we also gain a greater understanding and another picture of what Yah is showing. And, one of the things I think that I'm learning and I wanted to share with you is that we need to realize that, not all books of the Bible are a narrative. They're not all a story. There are different books that were written different ways. We have things that are called apocalyptic literature, like, parts of Ezekiel and Daniel are apocalyptic literature. And we also have books that are written that are poetry, like Psalms. But for most of us, we truly don't understand the difference. Okay. We don't really think about it. We just read it like it's a story. But if you go back to being in school, just remember learning poetry. Okay. When you read poetry, you're reading it differently than you're reading that narrative. And when you're reading poetry and when you're writing poetry, there are different types of figurative language that we use. And when I taught school, we would talk about hyperboles and similes and metaphors and personification and including all of that in our poems. Well, that's what happens when we read the book of poetry, Psalms. And it talks about the trees shall clap their hands. It's not literally meaning the trees are going to have hands. And that's just a simple example, but that we, just throw to the side. But when we come to something like Ezekiel or Daniel or some of these apocalyptic books, we tend to read it literally. And, as we look at Ezekiel, we'll need to remember especially what type of literature it is, and understand not only what the type of literature, because that's going to determine how you're reading it. I'm not going to read, just like the poetry with these hyperboles and metaphors as actually being literal. With apocalyptic literature, these symbols and things are not necessarily literal, but they are going to have meaning. And here's another problem, is that we lack a lot of times that understanding of ancient Near East customs and interpretation, and we put our current interpretation into it instead of relying on how they would interpret it back then. Okay. So often the visions themselves, like I said, don't symbolically represent something that is going to happen in the future, but it is giving a message concerning what God is doing. So I wanted to go back and look at what was the customs of that time and what were their understanding. Because when Ezekiel is seeing this, when we're sitting there, he may have thought about the tribes there, but there's also other imagery that he was very familiar with living in that time period, that vision is going to mean something slightly different to him, I believe. Okay, in Ezekiel's vision, if we go back to Ezekiel 1:1 and we look at that verse, that with an ancient Near East understanding, it talks about the cloud and the living creatures and the heavenly expanse and the throne. All of that is pointing to what? Yahweh's presence. And Ezekiel is getting this glimpse into heaven, or at least of heaven coming to earth. And that God is in the midst of it all. Okay. And these living creatures, when you start looking at, what they're seeing, because in ancient times the kings would arrive on these clouds. And what do I mean by they literally come on a cloud? But think about when a king would be coming, he is going to be bringing a large procession. There are going to be a lot of people, and he's not going to be at the front most of the time. He's going to be in the center, because he's going to have protection in front of him and he's going to have protection behind him. And there are all these people. Where do they live? In the Middle East. A lot of it's desert territory. They're walking with a lot of sand. If you have that many people that are walking with a lot of sand, and dust is going to be flying up, it is going to look like the king is coming on a cloud. Okay. So Ezekiel is given this glimpse into heaven. The heavens coming to earth. God is in the midst of it all. And these living creatures are actually like this heavenly court, this heavenly procession, all of these attendants that are preceding him. And, think about when a king's coming, they're going to have the people that are announcing and preparing his way. Or, it's like, think about, a color guard or whatever that ceremonially is marching in front of them, announcing that the king is coming. And they move whenever the spirit, or where the spirit would go. And so think about, the king's going to tell them where to go, which direction. They're going to move. They're going to dart from side to side. They're listening to his commands, and they're going to move up and down. Whatever he says is what they do. And, so basically it says that they have a companion set of wheels that move in sync with their movements. Basically, they're sharing like the same spirit of, this king, that they're doing what he says. These creatures, are going before God and doing his bidding. They're moving as he tells them to move. And so when we think about from Ezekiel's understanding, and he sees this cloud and these creatures that are coming, it's like the king is coming in. And he sees these beings, and they're able to look in all directions. They have, these four faces going from different directions. And it says that that the creatures serve, as wheels. Think about the wheels of a chariot that are bringing them along, and that they could travel in these directions. Okay. And if there's so many of them and they could go whichever way, it's actually showing that the power of that God, that king, he can be present anywhere. If they can go in any direction, that God, that king is aware of all of the events. What's going on over here, what's going on there, what's going on in front, he is aware of everything. They could go in any direction. And naturally a chariot with wheels, that had, wheels here, they couldn't go in all directions. But the image here is symbolic. It's drawing attention to, the four corners of the earth, that this king is a king that's in charge of all of the earth. Okay. And, two, it talks about their wings being outstretched, and that, as they fly through the air, and that you think about, well, they're flying through the air, that there's movement, and it's implying that they're moving and they're not just sitting in one place. And then it talks about these having four different faces: the lion, the eagle, or the bull, or the ox, the man. And that all of those, when you start going back and looking at ancient Near Eastern customs and art, each one of those, the lion, the eagle, the bull, or the ox, is actually a picture, and we see them associated with kings or leaders. They're referred to a lot of times. A king or a leader in ancient times will be referred to as being a specific animal. Now, that doesn't mean he's literally an animal, but it meant that he is actually is a symbolic of that attribute or power that that animal has. And by saying that this king is a lion, an eagle, a bull, and he's also a man, it is showing that the omnipotence of God, and that, the lion is showing his strength. And the eagle, they're very fast, they're speed, they're graceful. And that ox, also showing strength and fertility. And so we see all of that encompassed in what this vision is. And, what is this telling Ezekiel? Here's Ezekiel. He is a prisoner in Babylon. He's sitting by this river, and he's probably longing for home, just like the psalm says that by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept, and they wanted us to sing the songs of Zion. So he's longing for home. He probably has no idea, is the temple still standing? Because the temple was the center not only of their worship, but their life. And Yah's vision here to Ezekiel in Babylon is actually, in ancient Near Eastern terms, is displaying that, that I'm still in control. I am, no matter where you are, no matter where you're located, my presence is everywhere. I am in control over all of the world. And by showing you this vision and these pictures of these animals, I'm not only showing you my attributes, but I'm also trying to, he's also trying to connect him back to the tribes and give him the comfort that just as these animals are camped around me, but this, just like they camped around me, that Israel was encamped around me. And it all comes back to you obeying my commands. And it was a comfort, I believe, to Ezekiel, that while he was in exile, that Yah is trying to show him that, come back to my ways, be that creature within the wheel. Your exile is going to be over, and that there is a set time for that. But you have this image that is going on here, and he's trying to give it to Ezekiel as a comfort to him, not as a picture of, oh, this is going to happen in the last days and we're going to have these UFOs that are coming down. No, he's actually, I believe, trying to say to Ezekiel at that time, comforting him by things that he was familiar with, but that this is this is going to happen, and I am in control. I am in control. And, when you think about what is happening with this vision, and going back to this picture of the tribes encamping around, and that if is this another picture of us being Israel and camping around and have that Shabbat as our hub, the wheel within a wheel, and that as we're doing those feasts, that we're turning in His ways, we're going the direction that He wants us to go, and that He is with us in the midst of that. And that's where Yah was just leading me with this parsha this week, and I wanted to share that with you. Like I said, this was a week that we are going to have our fellowship gathering, and so I would not be able to get that out. So I did wanted to share that a little bit with you, and hopefully you enjoyed it. It's a little different than probably the regular parsha there, but I wanted to delve into some of the symbolism and tie it in with what I've been learning about a lot of the history. And like I said, a lot of times I think we read things and we put our own meaning to it instead of what it actually meant to that person. And we have to go back and understand, what did they understand about times? What did certain things mean to them in that day, and apply it that way. So may I bless you and keep you. And I hope you have a great Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.